everyone. Welcome to the show. This is, if you haven't joined us before, this is the Deal That Got Away, where we get in depth into real life scenarios from salespeople just like you. We have a really exciting deal this week. And when I say exciting, I mean exciting for us because we get to really get into the nitty gritty with a scenario I think a lot of us have been in. Not so exciting for the salesperson. So I'm going to give you a really quick overview of the deal as people are joining. So this deal comes to us from a seller who says, I had a first meeting. I was able to identify pain points. They seemed really excited, and they told me to send over a proposal. So, of course, I think a lot of us are getting happy ears. We think everything's going really well. The next steps for them to present the options to their manager and then get back to her. But she hasn't heard from them since. She has tried getting her manager to reach out to them. She hasn't received any feedback at all. So I think a lot of us have dealt with scenarios like this where we do get happy ears. We think that things are going well, that that deal is progressing. And the challenge is a lot of times these go dark. So I wanted to actually start as people are joining with a quick question. So I've heard a lot of sellers are going back to the basics right now because the basics are more challenging than ever. So I'm curious when it comes to kind of the two main areas of sales, right? Like the magic formula, which are you struggling with more? Are you struggling more with building pipeline, right? Like pipeline that's actually qualified, like getting deals in the pipeline, prospecting, just, chipping away at those top accounts? Or do you feel like you're struggling more with closing and winning those deals once they're in the pipeline? Give everyone a quick second. What are y'all struggling with most? Generating generating pipeline or closing pipeline? All right, we'll see. Okay. So, as I mentioned, this is the deal that got away where we go into live deal scenarios. So, I'm going to go into, thanks, Heston, closing. Hey, everyone. I see people are still joining. So I do have a question for y'all. Are you struggling more with building pipeline or winning active deals in your pipeline? What do you think? New to generating. Okay, also have to have a little bit of, a massive respect for people who are also just starting out as BDRs right now. Starting out as BDR is always challenging because pipeline is super tricky, but especially in the market today where there's lower response rates than ever, it can be really challenging to not only learn the job, but learn the job when your job is pretty impossible. So, ton of respect to people out there. Yep, building pipeline. Honestly, Nick and I will probably argue next week about which is harder or which is more important or which is more valuable. I'm biased, so I can say whatever I want on this call. Nick is actually on vacation this week, which is pretty impressive. He almost never takes vacation, so we're giving him that. All right, so we have a few people joining, and I want to welcome you to the show. As I mentioned, on the show, we are diving into real life prospects as well as deals. Every week, we have sellers, real sellers like you, who are submitting deals to us. These are real life scenarios, and I think the biggest one is what are the common themes that you're seeing? What are the things that you're like, I know this is a pattern, I know this is a trend, I don't know why this keeps happening to me, or how to handle it, and especially how to prevent it from happening in the future. So this deal is a big one. I was really excited when I got this because this is a very common one that I see. So I'm going to give like a pretty big description of this deal. And for everyone on the call today, I want you to actually type out like when you hear something, when your ears ring and you're like, ooh, my warning bells are going off, type in the chat. Let me know what you think. Okay. All right. So this seller gave us a ton of detail, which is really valuable. I had a fantastic call with a company where they explained that they have uh, I'm trying to not give away as many details. They have a current provider. There's opportunity for 10K monthly recurring revenue. And she also mentioned that there was a potential beyond what they were initially exploring on this call because her research told her that they operate in additional markets that weren't a part of this scope. So she is more mid market. So this is a great opportunity. They expressed several pain points and stated that they were not impressed with their current provider. They mentioned that strong customer service is going to drive their decision. They stated that they loved her product because ease of use and reimbursements, off-cycle payments, reporting and analysis, the service and support explained during the call. So she even has very specific, decision criteria and differentiators that they saw very valuable. I initially spoke with 2 team members, a coordinator and a specialist. I've taken out the specific roles just for anonymity. They're working on creating initial proposals, so they needed to see pricing, product features, and the next steps were going to be present to the manager, then present to finance. We discussed setting up a call with the manager and the finance team, but didn't lock a confirmed date in. She says, yikes, I hope you know where I'm going with this now. She put together a cost analysis for the team, but they have gone dark. Hasn't heard anything since. She also has taken some action. So she did had her manager reach out to both contacts on LinkedIn, but got no response. The next step that she's thinking is reaching out with a DM or on LinkedIn or an email. She wants your thoughts. So, what are some of the themes that you hear in this deal? Anything that stands out to you? As you type out what you see, I'm going to tell you what she actually sees because by the way, a part of getting the deal data is we really want to know what sellers, we know that you just like buyers, y'all are really smart. Sometimes we're also very analytical and critical of ourselves. So she actually has some ideas of where she went wrong. A few things that she knows that could have been much stronger. Oh, she's like, okay, I know that I didn't multi-thread from the beginning, and I also forgot to ask what their involvement is, the people that she's talking to. So she did have an idea. She wanted to, send a message saying, I wanted to follow up on our previous conversation, see what your team thought of the proposal. Would it be beneficial to schedule a call with your finance team to discuss this further? During the discussion, if you've basically reiterating the pain point, reiterating the value. She gives an overview of the company's value prop, customized to them, and follows up with, when we spoke, you mentioned the finance team has a big stake in the decision and that they would be a core user of the system as well. Have any questions come up from internal conversations? So she knows that she didn't multi-thread very effectively. So she's just, trying to come back with whatever she can do to remind them of the value, remind them of the pain, and to get some of the feedback from those users. So what do y'all think here? What challenges, what themes do you see, if any? I'll give you a minute. As I pour my tea. I know y'all are smart. What do you see in that deal? All right. I want to hear from y'all, but I have a few things that honestly for me are big gaps. So a few things. The top three things I see and kind of the questions I would be asking are first in terms of champions and connections. I think, anytime that I see a role like coordinator, or I think it was coordinator and um, where is it? Can't find it. Um, yeah, Hassan, I love this. So it might be helpful to outline the cost of doing nothing versus making a change. Understand how big of a priority this is for those internal teams. Love that idea. And I think that's a big one for next time. It's hard sometimes when we're like grasping at when a prospect has gone dark. Um, and especially when we think about the cost of doing nothing versus making a change, it's also really important to make sure we're talking to the right people. So for me, anytime we see someone, like a coordinator or a manager, I'm immediately thinking we probably need to get higher. And I think a lot of times the challenge is whenever we have people, moving really quickly and wanting to set things up, and we're like, yeah, we're going into a situation where we need to like present pricing and options. It also makes me think that these are not the real decision makers, that these are people gathering information, probably the end users, probably people who have been tasked with this, but again, not the key decision makers. So for me, that's a big one. Anytime I see manager, coordinator, um, anything that indicates an end user, we probably need to do two things. One, we do probably need to try to bring in other people. And one of the best ways I've seen to do that is to not just say, hey, I think we should bring in these people, or could we get some other people on the call next time? Because by the way, buyers are really smart and they know when they're trying to be sidestepped, they know when you're trying to go above their head, and that doesn't feel good. I've been a buyer, and I was an associate director, and I literally just had this seller pestering me to get access to the CRO, who was my boss. And honestly, the more that he fought for it, the more I was like, dude, I'm not going to put you in front of that person because I know you're going to be really pushy and aggressive, and this doesn't feel very good. So one of the best ways is to also help them map the objectives. So, you mentioned that these are some pain points. I am curious, for the people who are going to be evaluating this, it sounds like the finance team, like how does this ladder up to some of their goals? Do they share the same challenges? Tell me a little bit more about um, even like the level of awareness everyone has, because I talk to a lot of my customers, and a lot of the challenge for them is getting the rest of the organization to see the value of everything that they do and the challenges of the pain points that they experience. Like, how is it at your company? And that's usually a big one to get you in front of the right people, or also to help them map the business case. And ultimately, a lot of it is also, I think, a lack of discovery. Um, I definitely have been in those situations, and I've had a lot of sellers that have been in situations where we get really excited when the deal is progressing quickly, right? There's so much focus on the sales process and like shortening it and all these things that we think that shorter is better. But I would think of it a little bit more like checkpoints. Like, do not pass go if you have not checked off certain things. So for me, I know that, a lot of times we stop after we get some initial pain points, and we really don't go into the full spectrum of what we need to uncover to actually even build a compelling business case, to build a compelling proposal. Yeah, and so Hassan says, sounds like enabling the champion to influence the decision makers and leadership could revive this deal, assuming they still care to accomplish something in this area. Yes. That's a good point because when it comes to discovery, I think a lot of times, like I said, we stop at some surface level pain points. So some things that I would be focusing on here is really digging into the why behind it. Um, and this is something I'm constantly questioning. I have a few clients that work at this organization, and I'm constantly asking them, "Hey, so why does this matter to them?" For example, if you're expanding into new markets and you need to, basically set up certain aspects of that market. Why? Why are they expanding into the new market? Is this something that is kind of an immediate need, where, oh, this is just a one off? Or is this something that they really do need some long term support, right? Um, what is the why? And especially one thing that she mentioned, I don't know if y'all caught it, but she really also talked about the why in terms of um, she knows that she didn't get how the individual people were involved. Digging into the personal why for your champions, for your end users, for every single level of the organization and the decision is critical. One of my favorite questions to ask here is pretty simple. It's, hey, so there seems to be, these are some things that I'm hearing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the why behind it? Super simple. I also love a personal why question where, hey, we've talked a lot about the organization's challenges and goals. We talked a lot about your team's challenges and goals. Um, but I bet there's also a little bit of a personal initiative here. Can you tell me what the why is for you and your team individually? I've gotten really cool responses from this. I had a team that was selling a few years ago into American Express, and one of our champions told us, "Yeah, so I have a VP title right now, and I want to get an S in front of that title by the end of next year." And so when the deal got really tough, when we saw stalls, we actually told her, we're like, hey, we don't, it's totally okay for us to push this off, but I do want to remind you of just like, I want to go back to the goal that you shared, getting that S in front of your title. And I just want to make sure that that's not affected by this. Like, do you see any effect? And she's like, actually, let me go back. Let's try to get this done. So that personal goal and that personal impact, the personal pain can be really important. But also something to note, just like Heston mentioned in a few comments, um, if we need to also understand where we're starting within the organization. If we're starting with someone lower level, then our job is to identify the pain points, but also be compassionate with them. The challenge is realizing that not everyone might care about their pain points or even be aware of them or even think that they're important to solve if we don't map them to broader pains within the organization. And I think this is where a lot of people struggle, not only sellers, but also champions. Because if you're not helping your champion identify that risk point, which is if they are not able to map what they're doing and what they're experiencing, what their goals are, what their challenges are, what the real pain points are, with how that impacts who is actually making the decision, they're probably not going to be able to convince people to dedicate budget, and you're probably going to lose the deal. So it's very critical to enable the champion to sell for you internally. The other thing, did anyone notice competition? Anyone hear anything that stood out to you around competition or kind of the process? As you're typing, what I heard was, so the next steps were supposed to be, yeah, we're going to gather proposals and present some offerings to our finance team. This sounds like a little bit of like an RFP situation, and not as formal as an RFP, but With competition, I mean, like buyers today are smart, and not only are they smart, but finance teams and procurement teams and legal teams are also smart. And I think most of the time, even when a team really wants one solution, they are required to do their due diligence. They are required to at least come like literally when I was evaluating conversation intelligence tools as a sales trainer, I had to come up with at least like 5 leading um, solutions in this space. And I also had to present an analysis of what it would look like to do this on our own internally. So my question is, who are they? Who are you competing with? And not only the competition of direct competition, but also are they looking to do this themselves? And especially if we're presenting to a finance team, they're probably going to want several options. They're going to want a full analysis. So, especially here, one thing you need to think about is sometimes when they're moving super quickly, when they're like, "Oh my gosh, this sounds great. This is kind of how we see you," whatever. One, they might be actually just being nice and giving you some nice feedback, especially if there were just like one. It sounds like there might have just been one meeting. Um, when you're in a competitive environment like this, you might actually just be the due diligence. So here, questioning is critical. Really asking, "Hey, so tell me." It sounds like you're actually, really looking your options and presenting some of your favorites to the team. So I'm curious, can you tell me a little bit more about, what options are you evaluating right now? Are you looking both at, like, how do those compare? Are you looking both at, a few different types of company like we are? I would probably just say the type of company you are. What about other options? Are you getting creative with are you considering doing this on your own? Really getting that competitive landscape is also critical. So, I definitely hear some happy ears here because I think when we are asked to give a proposal, we get really excited. But if we're asking of a proposal after one meeting and they're moving really quickly and they're presenting this to their team, it could be one of two things. It could be that they might have already found the solution they're looking for, and they really just want you to kind of be in the mix to again do their due diligence. It also could be that maybe they as champions, as Heston said, like, are not very enabled. Maybe they don't know the full scope that finance is going to ask of them in terms of analysis, like strong points, weak points, all of those things. Maybe they went into that meeting and they bombed because they weren't very prepared and they weren't really understanding like how to present this, how to map the value, how to even assess all of their different options and present those to the team. And one of the things here is that you don't know until you ask. And I think a lot of people are afraid to ask about competition because we're afraid is kind of like what they say about like negative manifestation, where people are like, oh, if I mention it, it's going to make it real. Well, it doesn't. It just means that if you mention it and you talk about it and you ask about it, you actually have the opportunity to handle competitive objections on the call. And if you do it really well, and I'll give you a few ways to do that, then you can also make it really have the opportunity to change from a um, salesperson sitting on the opposite side of the table from them to a true consultant, really sitting with them and helping them make an objective decision. So I'm curious if y'all have any competitive questions that just work incredibly well. Type them in the chat, but I have a few ideas for y'all. One, on every discovery call, even the simple question, again, like before if there is competition, just ask. Some questions here are, hey, so tell me a little bit more about the stage of evaluation you're in. What options are you considering? How do those compare to you? Even asking if you know that there's competition, a lot of times our brains just melt and we freeze. But when you do hear competition, one, take a deep breath, take a sip of water, calm your nerves a little bit, and ask, hey, so those are some great options. How are you kind of ranking them, and what stands out? One of my favorites is, what do you like and what have you learned from exploring some of these different options? Also, if they are in an analysis like this, one key question around competition is, hey, so I know that we're just kind of getting started with you. Tell me a little bit more about where you're at in the process with all of these options. Kind of what are some of those next steps? Understanding if they've already seen demos, if they've already kind of made a decision, if you are just the due diligence, or if they are really actively exploring, can be very helpful. And that leads to another big, I think the fourth big bucket that I see here, which is the decision process. So one of the biggest reasons that we, I think, lose deals, lose engagement is because we really don't know where they're at. When we are being asked to put together a proposal that they're going to present, um, that worries me, for reasons that we've talked about before. But asking decision process questions can be incredibly important. So, really thinking about, hey, so where are you at in the evaluation? It sounds like y'all are moving quickly. What other options have you explored? What are you leaning towards? But also taking it those next steps further. So I think this is where the seller admitted, she's like, okay, I know that I should have, gotten some additional details and gotten next steps. But especially here, one of the things that goes back to Hessen's point around champion enablement. So a lot of what I've seen on LinkedIn, even in the past week, has kind of argued. I feel like sometimes we are arguing like, are our buyers just incredibly intelligent? Do they know what they're doing? Or do they not know and they need help? And I think it's somewhere in the middle. And I think they are incredibly smart. They're incredibly good at their jobs. And that actually sometimes does not serve them because they're not salespeople. So while they have an incredible intelligence and they know a lot about their jobs, they might not always know how to sell things internally. Think about how hard it is for you all to uncover objections and to manage those, right? A lot of times our buyers are not necessarily prepared for those things. And especially realizing that you do your job every single day. Not only are you aware of what's going to come up, but you can actually help enable them. So with questions around decision process, I think a lot of times we approach these very selfishly, where we just want the information. When are you having the next meeting? Who is going to be on that? How can I get on that? Can I help you with that? We probably need to get these people involved. I probably need to get in front of them. That just screams, I want control as a salesperson. Some more compassionate ways of doing that are, hey, so tell me a little bit more about, that next meeting. Are there any concerns you have? Like, what questions and concerns do you think that your team is going to ask of you? And that's a really good question because they might not have thought of any. They're like, no, it's going to just be me presenting to the team, like in their mind. They're like, oh, we're just going to present our 3 options. This is our favorite. And they're going to be like, perfect. Here's budget. Any salesperson knows that that is not usually how those conversations go. So what we can do is to really help them almost prepare for the meeting by really like walking through it. And to say, hey, so as I build out, a little bit more of a business case for this, these are some things that often come up in conversations. Could I share a few of the things that I'm a little bit worried about? You can, by the way, if you go through, I have a deal scorecard that I use to help you identify some of those risks. And sharing those risks with them are critical. For example, you can say, hey, so one thing I'm a little bit worried about is, it seems like that you and your team have a really good understanding of where the pain points are, where the challenges are, and especially with things like mitigating risk and managing compliance. I don't know about y'all, but it's sometimes hard to get other teams to see the value of it when it's such like a hypothetical. And hopefully if you've done a good job of customizing this to your market and your champions, they're gonna laugh and they're gonna be like, "Wow, yes, no one understands how important it is to be really compliant in these situations." So having a lot of empathy then can be a really good pathway to, "Can I share a few things like that can go wrong in meetings like this?" And things like that can be really effective way for you to give some guidance on, as well as do some deeper discovery. What are some of those next steps? What are you worried about? How can we help you really strategize and approach those? So we have a lot of different things that could have gone wrong here, and ultimately we don't know. I think that there's probably three scenarios, or there's probably honestly 2 scenarios. One, the coordinator and the manager presented their findings to finance, and they just had, like, 7 different options or even, like, 3 different options, and they went with someone else. They went with a different process. They went with internal solution. They went with a competitor. They, basically just found something to do, someone else to do. The other option is that they did nothing, that maybe they were actually more exploratory than we initially thought. Maybe they weren't able to secure budget or funding for anything. Maybe they were forced to do things internally, or even, most of us, our biggest competitor, even if we think it's, unless you're selling payroll, like where I started my career, where you have to have a payroll provider, a lot of us are struggling with the biggest competitor, especially right now, of do nothing, where they're not going with someone else. They're not making a decision. They're ultimately just not making any decision at all. They're not able to secure funding. They're not able to secure budget approval. And ultimately, or even they're like, hey, this is really cool. Let's do this in 2 to 3 years. So, really asking those competitive questions is critical. Making sure you're doing enough discovery, making sure that you're understanding who is involved in the deal and how what they're struggling with maps up, and really wrapping that together in a nice business case that illustrates that not only is a business case that just gives an ROI assessment because this is what your marketing team gave you, but is really designed to enable your champion to sell for you internally. That is key. So, I have some ideas for, next steps to re-engage, but I'm curious, any takeaways from that you would be thinking about? Anything that resonated, anything that you thought was that we really need to think about as we move forward with this? I'm gonna give y'all a minute. As I spill my tea all over myself. So, I'm gonna give y'all a minute to really think about like what was meaningful for you. But some takeaways and action items for me, I'm really thinking that we just need to know what happened. So this is a good opportunity to do what we call falling on your sword. Oh, yeah. Asking about competition doesn't change whether it exists or not. So one of my favorite scenarios here, I actually have a little bit of a flow. when it comes to re-engaging gone dark prospects. So, one of the things that is really helpful here is to not think of it as I need to have one email that will just get a response, but to actually approach it from multiple perspectives. So, I approach these situations with what we call like falling on your sword, which is basically saying, hey, haven't heard from you. Honestly, these are kind of 3 things that I think might have happened. I'm curious, like, maybe y'all went with another provider. I know that I didn't really ask about who else you were like, what other solutions you were looking at, but I know that a lot of times, there are other options. So, if that happened, happy that y'all made a decision, go ahead and let me know. But one other thing that I see happening a lot is maybe y'all actually didn't make a decision and maybe you pushed off the entire project. Um, so tell me a little bit more, like, let me know how to proceed. Totally okay with either, but I don't want to bother y'all and I want to make sure that you got the support that you needed. So doing that can be really effective because people are like, yep, went with another solution. Bye. At least you can close it out. You can actually, of course, re-engage and say, "Hey, great to hear that." As a seller, it's always really helpful to know, what you went with, and um, maybe hold on. So knowing who you went with, and if you have any feedback on the why, it would be really helpful for me to understand as a salesperson. But also, maybe you don't get any response. Maybe they just continue to ghost. And there are a couple of additional strategies that we can use in scenarios like this. I definitely love a little bit of the what we call like executive sponsorship, where we ask, higher level people or even different people in our company to email. On LinkedIn, what I find is sometimes people aren't always on LinkedIn or they don't think like use in that capacity. So, but I do think a multi-channel approach can be helpful. So you can literally email them and say, hey, I have, someone, your manager, someone higher level up, just a fresh perspective, a fresh voice, say, hey, we were pretty excited about, what we heard from your company. This sounds like a really exciting project for you. Congrats on the expansion, things like that. The last time we heard that y'all were really evaluating your options here and thinking about, what budget made sense, et cetera. Maybe y'all have made a decision, but let me know where you're at and if I can help in any way. Easy. You still don't get a response after multiple types of, formats, multiple channels, multiple types of messages. Um, the final thing that I find really ironically effective is to send them something unrelated. This can be even as easy as something like a case study or an event that you're like, hey, I saw this event, thought of you. um, Also really effective to do something more personal where you're like, it doesn't even have to be a gift, but it can be, hey, I know that you were super into craft beer. I actually was at this brewery this weekend, thought you would enjoy the menu. Like, let me know what you think. Something personal can also be effective if you built that level of rapport. So one thing that why that often works is because, and I don't she didn't mention how long it's been, but even if it's like a couple of weeks, I've done that and I've literally had people message me back and be like, hey, I'm so sorry. I've had your email in my inbox for like 2 weeks. It's been on my to-do list, but something came up and like, we were at a conference and we just got super busy, or things have shifted a little bit within the organization and we have to actually like stall this project. I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you an update, but I wanted to wait until I have more details. Some people don't respond because, one, something came up, they're busy, etc. They're basically, they want to respond when they're less busy. Or sometimes they I think a lot of times when it's later in the sales process and they have a lot to do in terms of that, it almost causes a little bit of stress when they're like, "Hey, what are the next steps on this?" And they're like, "Oh my goodness." Even asking them about the next steps means that they're like, "Oh my goodness, I have to do this and do that, and, like, I forgot about this, and I have to do that." So, sending something that's a little bit less that doesn't add stress, but relieves stress. "Oh, wow, yeah, I can just check this off my list by just telling them where we're at," can be really effective. Curious, any other ideas from y'all? What would you do? How would you reengage? Any final ideas for this seller? Bet we can get one more. And there's always a lag, so yeah. Literally get on the phone. A phone call into the champion could be effective. Um, Sometimes I also like a good text message. If you have their phone number, um, you can even text something like I've literally just texted like, "Hey, know the email inbox can be super overwhelming sometimes. Just, wanted to see if this was still on the table. Don't want to bother you, but like, let me know where we're at. Would love to help if this is still something you're exploring." So, just doing a simple phone call, doing a text message, again, realizing that their email inbox, I don't know about y'all, but when I have been in a full time role, my email inbox is insane and it is a source of stress. So, by the way, phone calls into your champion are much more effective, especially text messages to your champion, if you establish it from the beginning. So, one quick final strategy for y'all: get on a text get on a texting basis, get on a less formal messaging basis with your champion sooner. Especially, for example, kind of pairing some of the things we talked about today, in the future when I am helping enable my champions to sell into the other teams, one thing I always do is to say, "Hey, so when is that meeting again?" And they're like, "Okay, it's on Thursday at this time." And I'm like, "Ooh, that's so exciting." Of course, I'm doing like a lot of prep with them and I'm saying, where are you struggling? What are you excited about? What are you nervous about? Things like that. Um, but I'm always saying, "Hey, so um, would it be okay to just like send you a quick text to see how that went? Like to send you over an email? What should you prefer?" Even when one of the most effective ways to get that early on the process is also to do it after demos. Anytime you're bringing in additional people, just sending your champion a quick message. "Hey, before I send out the feed, like the follow up from the meeting, how do you think that went?" Super effective when people are like, I loved it. Did you see this person's face though? I think they were like, I think they might have had a question or been a little overwhelmed. I'm going to see what they think." So you can not only get great feedback, but it also helps you have additional channels to leverage when you have any deal stalls, when things might go dark. Just establishing that can be really effective. Earlier, the better. So, thanks for this call. I know it's a little bit weird when I'm just talking. Usually we have a ton of banter with me and Nick. He will be back next week, so we'll have our favorite Canadian on the call. I have to think of all of my other Canadian partners that I just outed, but well, we hope to see you then. As we mention, every other week is focused on active deals like this already in your pipeline, but next week is going to be focused on prospecting. So we're going to focus on those impossible deals, the ones that your top prospect on your list, the one that you have not been able to crack. Last week we focused on a prospect who, like literally someone, an inbound lead from marketing that did not go very well, literally got no response, but we were getting a ton of pressure. So I'm excited to hear what we have on the roster for next week. But if you also have a deal that you would like us to cover, if you would like to come on the show or just have it submitted anonymously, like today, even though it's a little bit less engaging, we always know that it can be a little bit vulnerable and especially sensitive with deal data. So we're always happy to cover deals like this. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you want to be on the show. And if you want a little bit more help, Nick and I also offer a lot of resources, a lot of individual coaching. And final thing, I'm actually hosting a free training next week on how to win more deals. So if you actually want some tangible resources like a deal scorecard, if you want to know how to avoid these things, these situations more proactively versus reactively, where we have to cover our tracks and try to re-engage and really cling desperately to like all the mistakes that we know that we made in the deal. If you want to get more proactive and make sure those things don't happen before they do, go ahead and join the training. I'll be sharing it out this week. So thank you all so much for joining. Hope to see you on another show and hope you have a good week and close a ton of deals. Bye, y'all.